Welcome to The Explainer, everyone, especially all you young couples out there seeking to build a truly Christ-centered marriage. Today, we're basically stepping right into the classroom to unpack something that might just completely change how you view your most important partnership. We're digging into Dr. Faith O'Neill's fascinating thesis on how our modern drive for independence is actually the hidden root of so many relationship struggles. We so often think our marital issues come down to communication breakdowns, financial stress, or just, basic incompatibility. But what if the real problem goes way deeper than that? What if the very thing our culture constantly tells us to strive for, total, unapologetic independence, is the exact thing tearing our homes apart? So grab your notebooks because we are going to break this all down together.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our syllabus for today. We'll be covering the root problem of independence, comparing modern autonomy with biblical dependence, checking out the divine blueprint of order, and seeing exactly how pride impacts both intimacy and the next generation, before we finish up with some highly practical steps to restore your home.
All right, diving right into section 1, the root problem, which is our independence from God.
To really understand modern relationship fractures, Dr. Anya takes us all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. Because honestly, you can't fix a crack in the wall without checking the foundation first, right? Our foundational understanding of human relationships starts right at the beginning of the biblical narrative. In this verse from Genesis, it wasn't some kind of compliment to human progress. It was actually a profound judgment on man's incredibly dangerous attempt to define life and morality completely apart from God. When humanity was cut off from the tree of life, it was a crystal clear demonstration that life itself was meant to be sustained by our Creator, not just seized independently.
So the fall wasn't just about breaking a rule or eating a piece of fruit. It was humanity's first tragic step into autonomous self-rule. Autonomy in this context is defined as knowledge without submission, experience without obedience, and moral independence without accountability. It's that exact moment the human race essentially decided, hey, I got this. I can do this on my own. And let me tell you, that exact same spirit is what creeps into our marriages today. It shows up in daily life when, say, we make a major financial purchase or suddenly pivot our career ambitions without even consulting our spouse. We quietly sabotage our unity because we've decided to prioritize our own independence over our covenant.
Moving on to section 2, autonomy versus biblical dependence. What are we actually built for?
While our modern culture absolutely celebrates this I answer to no one mentality as the peak of maturity, Dr. Anya's text reveals that this mindset actually destroys the humility required for a true covenant. The modern push for self-definition claims that absolute empowerment means ultimate freedom, but biblical dependence, that is rooted in interdependent obedience under authority. Humans simply were not built for self-rule. When you bring an I answer to no one attitude into a marriage, maybe by keeping emotional secrets or flat out refusing to compromise on your personal weekend schedule, you aren't building a partnership anymore. You are essentially building two competing kingdoms under one roof.
And that brings us perfectly to section 3, the blueprint of divine order, God's actual design for the home. If you want to build a house that can actually withstand a storm, you have to follow the architect's plans. 1 Corinthians 11:3 lays out this brilliant chain of authority. It's a 3-step flow of interdependence showing that no one, and I mean no one, not even the husband, operates in isolated self-rule. God the Father is the head of Christ. Christ is the head of every man, and man is the head of the woman. It is a continuous, beautiful chain of accountability. The husband is never meant to be an absolute dictator. His authority is entirely dependent on his own submission to Christ.
Now, we need to camp out here for a second, because it is absolutely vital to understand that true biblical submission is completely different from the cultural view of weakness. It is actually a profound spiritual alignment with this divine order. When a wife submits, it's not some symbol of inferiority. Culture constantly tells young couples that submission means losing your voice or losing your value. But in the biblical blueprint, submission is an act of incredible strength and faith. It's acknowledging that a thriving home absolutely requires a structured spiritual covering. Which leads us right into section 4, pride, sacrifice, and intimacy. So what happens when a husband refuses to lead sacrificially, or a wife fights for control? Well, they're essentially just mimicking Genesis 3, and in the process, they severely fracture their marital intimacy. When pride takes the wheel, we see this constant, exhausting competition for control over everyday things. Who manages the household budget? Whose career takes priority? Who gets to dictate the parenting style? This friction leads directly to emotional self-protection. Instead of opening up to your spouse after a really hard day, you build walls. You stop revering the divine structure and intimacy, that true, deep marital closeness we all crave. It simply evaporates.
Dr. Anya makes a really powerful point here. When couples prioritize their own individualistic self-actualization over their spouse, their relationships inevitably weaken and break. To put it simply, and this is a quote you might want to write down, saying "I answer to no one" is not biblical freedom, it is rebellion wherein the language of empowerment. When culture tells you that you need to put your own self-discovery above your covenant vows, it is actively selling you a counterfeit version of freedom that ultimately just leads to isolation.
Let's look at the ripple effect in Section 5, the impact on the next generation.
Dr. Onia's analysis gives us a very objective look at how this societal shift happened. Modern independence movements often arose from very real, highly valid grievances. We're talking about historic abuse, lack of education, or economic vulnerability, and it is absolutely crucial to acknowledge that. However, separating this push for empowerment from God's moral order has resulted in some severe unintended consequences. By shifting the ultimate center of authority toward the self, we've seen a massive normalization of resistance to marriage commitment, heavily strained traditional family structures, and obviously rising divorce rates.
And here's why this matters so much for those of you with kids or planning to have them. Parental reliance on God directly impacts a child's stability. A home built on self-rule leaves children facing some really severe challenges. When mom and dad are constantly in a tug of war for autonomy, the kids experience completely inconsistent parenting and a divided home. It weakens discipline, basically because the parents aren't a unified front. It breeds identity confusion and ultimately strips away the child's overall sense of security. The absolute greatest gift you can give your kids isn't a picture of perfect, unbothered personal independence. No, it's a picture of parents beautifully, humbly submitted to God and to each other.
So, how do we fix it? That's Section 6, Restoring the Divine Order. Both spouses have a challenging daily assignment here. The husband, he has to actively sacrifice his own drive for total autonomy so he can lead like Christ. Practically, this means sacrificing his own comfort to protect and serve his bride daily. It means stepping up in hard conversations with truth and holiness rather than dominating the household, or conversely, just checking out entirely. On the flip side, the wife must embrace independent submission as a profound strength. It is a faithful alignment to God's design, trusting the spiritual covering God has established rather than fighting to always have the final say in every single decision. When sacrificial headship and faithful submission are working together, that is when the divine order is beautifully restored.
These foundational verses from John 15 and Acts 17 prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that human beings simply were never built for self-rule. Jesus literally says, "Without me, ye can do nothing." Our true flourishing only happens through constant, humble dependence on our Creator. We have to breathe His air, rely on His wisdom, and completely submit to His relational architecture.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you and your spouse with a bit of homework. Seriously, ask yourselves, where in your marriage are you choosing the cultural pursuit of personal autonomy over humble dependence on God's blueprint? Because acknowledging your dependence on God and truly repenting of that Genesis 3 desire to rule yourselves is the very first step to restoring true, lasting intimacy. Take some time tonight, grab a cup of coffee, and just talk about this with your spouse. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep building on the right foundation.